This is Doctor Talks, real talk from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Reversing Type 2 Diabetes Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Beverly Yates, ND. For this session, this episode, we have one of our wonderful sponsors, Pendulum, here, and their medical expert, Dr. Orville Kolterman. I'll be interviewing him to get a better perspective about the wonderful things that the Pendulum products offers for people who have type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, and other kinds of blood sugar regulation concerns. So, Dr. Kolterman, welcome to this episode.
Well, thank you.
All right, we're really glad to have you here. Would you give us just a little overview of your background and your work with Pendulum?
Certainly, it'd be my pleasure. I'm an internal medicine doctor trained as an endocrinologist. Have spent my entire professional career working in the area of diabetes with a focus on type 2 diabetes. Was on the faculty at University of Colorado and University of California, San Diego, prior to moving to the biotech industry, where I worked with a company, Emlyn Pharmaceuticals, developing peptide-based drugs for the treatment of metabolic conditions. We actually were the company that brought the first GLP-1, analog, to market. Emlyn was purchased, it was bought out in 2012, and I thought I was going to retire, but became bored and was approached by Colleen Cutcliffe, the CEO of what's now Pendulum, about, diving into the microbiome, which I, agreed to do, and spent 10 years as a chief medical officer and still enjoying, every minute of it.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that Colleen Cutcliffe, the CEO, connected with you. Your background is so specific and wonderfully rich for exactly what Pendulum's doing in its mission to help people have better glycemic regulation and better blood sugar control and results. So would you share with us, you touched a little bit on that microbiome topic, and we're going to explore it more in depth here because it is central when we think about how the body regulates blood sugar and we promote insulin sensitivity and get better response to the interaction of glucose and insulin. So the gut and metabolic axis, it's an exciting, emerging, growing area of study. Lots is going on. We know a lot and we're learning even more, right? I don't know that everything has been discovered. I doubt that yet. So how does the gut play a role specifically with metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes?
So there are a couple of different ways that, the gut microbiome, impacts this. So with the adoption by our society of the so-called Western diet, which is low in fiber, high in refined, carbohydrates, overloaded with simple sugars, the dietary fiber has gone missing from that diet. And the healthy microbiome, the bacteria that make up a healthy microbiome, rely upon those fiber sources as their energy supply. So if you starve the microbiome, the bacteria that live off of that fiber source, diminish in amounts and sometimes disappear completely. That has two major, and I say major because we're learning more and more every day, and I expect that there will be even more connections that are worked out over the coming years. But the two that play critical roles that we know about today are the bacteria in the microbiome that digest or ferment the dietary fiber, produce short chain fatty acids. And one of those short chain fatty acids is butyrate, which is important because it's an energy source for the cells that line the intestinal tract. But it also is a signaling molecule that binds to the cells in the gut that secrete GLP-1, and GLP-1 is you just pay attention to the lay media today, is critically involved in the regulation of metabolism, particularly as it relates to glucose control, but also is playing a major role in terms of appetite control, satiety, and the maintenance of a healthy weight. The other axis that is well worked out is that a specific bacteria in the microbiome, namely, God, I'm drawing a blank. How embarrassing! Akkermansia, mucinophilia, maintains the integrity of a mucin layer that lies on top of the interstitial or lining, of the gut, and that the cellular lining plus this mucin layer form a barrier that keep bad actors, that shouldn't get into the bloodstream in the interior of the gut, so they pass on through, and out of the body. And if Akkermansia becomes starved, it decreases in amounts. I guess with the butyrate producers decrease, Akkermansia tends to decrease. And if you lose Akkermansia's ability to maintain that mucin layer, a so-called leaky gut syndrome, evolves. And what that means is that things that shouldn't get into the bloodstream get across and get into the bloodstream, various toxins and what have you, and those substances create inflammation throughout the body. And as it relates to inflammation, it's become clear over the last 5-6 years that generalized inflammation plays a significant role in driving insulin resistance, throughout the body.
Makes sense, right? All of these things are so interrelated. And I've always thought that the good news is find a key area or two to focus on and you'll get benefits systemically. But we always have to be able to plant our flag and get some results, right? So what are the two main dysfunctions that occur for the gut microbiome of people who are living with type 2 diabetes? And how is that related to missing bacterial strains?
So you mentioned the fact that there are strains in the healthy microbiome that ferment the dietary fibers and produce these short chain fatty acids. And again, as it relates to metabolic diseases, butyrate is particularly important. So in almost anyone that has components of the metabolic syndrome, multiple studies have shown that there is a deficiency of the butyrate producers, in the microbiome. And then in parallel, as I mentioned earlier, there tends to be a decrease in Akkermansia, which sort of, Akkermansia's actual role is that it digests damaged mucin, which interestingly, by Akkermansia digesting that damaged mucin, it actually stimulates the formation of new, healthy mucin by increasing number of mucin producing cells in the lining of the gut. And so those are, two things that happen that play a very significant role, as it relates to metabolic syndrome and, type 2 diabetes in particular.
Absolutely. These things are really important. I remember in the 90s, there was some research that had come out around the importance of butyrate and the role of butyric acid and what goes on for the gut and the gut lining. And then people talked about the interstitial permeability of the cell lining. And then, it became more popularized as leaky gut syndrome. And now here we are full circle with understanding the impacts specifically on blood sugar regulation.
Right.
I think this is a very fertile area of continued growth and research and understanding. And I'm really glad for the kinds of products that Pendulum has because it makes a tangible, provable, objective difference for people's blood sugar.
Correct.
Okay. So then how does this gut metabolism access regulate this glucose metabolism? And what role does GLP-1 play in this process? GLP-1 is something that people are starting to hear more and more about, whether it's commercial drugs like Ozempic or Mounjaro, Zepbound, etc. What role does it play here? And then can we optimize GLP-1 production through the gut microbiome in a natural way?
Yeah, so GLP-1 is what's known as a incretin hormone, which means that it's stimulated by the ingestion of food, and it augments insulin secretion. So if GLP-1 production falters or lags behind, there's not an adequate production of insulin, which is key to regulating blood sugar control. But GLP-1 is actually sort of this amazing peptide, which not only does it impact insulin secretion, but it also impacts the rate at which the food moves through the stomach. And it I like to think of it as it turns the stomach into, or maintains the stomach as a reservoir that holds food. And instead of just dumping it all into the small intestine for absorption at once, it sort of trickles it in, over time. So that's another, contributing factor to, improving metabolic control. And then it also works, centrally, in the brain. Turns out that it impacts. So there are two parts of this. One is that GLP-1 that makes it into the bloodstream can actually enter the brain. I mean, I learned in medical school that there was this blood-brain barrier that nothing got across. Well,
I did too.
yeah. Well, back in our days at Amylin, we learned, came to understand that in the brainstem there's this area postrema that has a fenestrated blood-brain barrier, which means that it actually has holes in it that peptides of certain sizes can get across, and they cross over into the area postrema, which is rich in GLP-1 receptors, and it then plays a major role in satiety by virtue of what happens in the area postrema triggers a whole network of neural circuits, in the brain, all of which are, impacting, appetite control, satiety. And there's still a lot to be learned about that. I mean, it's really, the knowledge level there is really exploding right now. And something that I think is equally important, and it ties back into how the microbiome can influence this, is that we now know that there are nerve endings in the lining of the gut that have GLP-1 receptors. So GLP-1 that is secreted locally can interact with those receptors. Those receptors trigger signals that travel up, that those nerve endings up to enter the vagus nerve, which is a sort of a super highway, directly to the brain. And again, when those signals get to the, to the, I guess, the toll booth, if you will, going into the brain, they sort of trigger a number of signals that again fan out and impact, various satiety centers. And so that means that GLP-1 is having two different, lines of attack, if you will, all, trigger, all directed at improving metabolic control, satiety, and, weight control.
Those are important relationships. I think that one of the things I've heard people commonly express, they talk about food noise, or they can't stop thinking or obsessing about food, or they feel like they're never full, that they're always
Right.
hungry, things like that. It's clear that this GLP-1 peptide relationship in the body makes a huge difference to whether or not someone can be at peace with food or if they're just going to struggle. And so whatever we can do to help promote that GLP-1 functionality is going to be a good thing for human health. This is a place where we have to win, because we see the profound metabolic changes happening for people, so many more people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, type 3 diabetes, which is what affects the brain and leads to dementia and Alzheimer's, type 1 diabetes showing up in adults, type 1.5. Wow, this is just a moment in human history. We have got to have more answers. So I appreciate you explaining this. I really do.
So another aspect of that I think is going to be really big is
Mhm.
that you mentioned people making peace with food. There's some very intriguing, literature, evolving as we speak, showing that that GLP-1, impacts not only satiety centers, but the sort of the cravings, centers, of the brain. And it goes across nicotine, alcohol, even hard drugs. So I think those are going to be very, rewarding areas, in the near future. And those of us at Pendulum are very pleased to see that studies are showing that acromantia also, impacts, cravings. We've just completed a study, with acromantia, product where people were, provided with, with acromantia, and, using the state of the art questionnaires to assess food cravings. We, the data show that food cravings, decreased in over 90%, of people. And interestingly or importantly, I think that the stronger the food cravings were at baseline, the greater the impact, of the akkermansia.
That's great. I'm a fan of giving people control over their lives, giving them agency, and they can make good decisions and not constantly be at war with themselves, because that's kind of what it seems like it is for the person who has that issue.
Of interest, one of the sets of questions in that questionnaire actually target, fast food, and demonstrate that there was an impact on, people's desire or drive to stop by the McDonald's on the way home, which certainly is a health positive step forward there.
Definitely. Highly processed, ultra refined food is never a good thing for human health. Yeah, that statement stands alone. Okay. All right. So now that we have this context, we're talking about the gut microbiome and optimizing GLP-1 production, helping people to make peace with food and to be able to have a real tool around success with battling cravings and making good food choices and wanting to do it, right? Because once a person turns that corner, they tend to stay there, which is great news, right? So is there evidence for the use of probiotics and prebiotics in glucose management for individuals who have type 2 diabetes?
So the good news is that yes, there is. Some of the traditional probiotics have been shown to have some impact on glucose control. These are things like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. But uh, the founders at Amylin, Colleen and her colleagues, actually have a background in sequencing and DNA sequencing, and that's the technology that sort of opened up the microbiome. And doing their sequencing work in their former life, they noticed that there were certain patterns of changes in the microbiome that were associated with type 2 diabetes. And there were other investigators that were making similar observations or published in the literature. And again, it points to, I guess, the thing that sets Pendulum apart is that lactobacillus bifidobacteria are bacteria that can grow in the presence of oxygen. But there are a number of keystone strains, really key players in the microbiome. And it turns out that those are the ones that ferment the fiber, actually are anaerobic bacteria, meaning that they cannot tolerate the presence of oxygen when they are, they're actively, metabolizing. But historically, those are bacteria that have been not leveraged for any kind of use because such a challenge to grow them. So anyway, Colleen and her colleagues noticed that those bacteria were decreased in patients with type 2 diabetes. And so we use that data to sort of target, if you will, a sweet formulation, no pun intended, that would, target, the deficiencies that we've seen. And those deficiencies were, the ability to ferment fiber and produce butyrate. So, the formulation has 3 different butyrate, producing organisms, in it. And then also in metabolic syndrome, as we've touched upon several times in this conversation, akkermansia, is decreased. So, we're able to develop a process by which you could grow, akkermansia successfully. And then all of these strains is once they're grown, if they're grown in the absence of oxygen and you then freeze dry them, they are stable, in the presence of oxygen, until they become, rehydrated. So you're able to make a powder, formulate, your probiotic strain, put it in a capsule, and then it's available, for people to use. And we have conducted a study in patients with type 2 diabetes, all of whom are using the common drug metformin. And we demonstrated that the introduction of this 5-strain formulation that's now known as Pendulum glucose control led to significant improvement in terms of glucose homeostasis. And there's also some evidence emerging that it's probably also beneficial in terms of managing and controlling lipids.
It makes sense. These things all go together. They're hand in hand. Many people who have type 2 diabetes also have unhealthy, unfriendly cholesterol profiles. And so being able to get multiple benefits is always going to be good news, right? That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. So from a nutritional standpoint, is there anything that individuals with diabetes can do to improve the state of their gut microbiome?
Yeah, so it turns out that the general recommendations that nutritionists have been making for years are the ones that are beneficial for type 2 diabetes or for patients with type 2 diabetes. The challenge has been is that that diet tends to be rich in fiber, soluble fiber. It things like nuts, berries, green leafy vegetables, all things that are, have a good fiber content, the right kind of fiber to feed the microbiome have been recommended. But the problem has been is that the other half of the team has been missing, and that these the deficiencies in the microbiome. So if you put those dietary recommendations together with replenishing the microbes in the microbiome, you sort of, as I like to say, get the whole loaf. You get both the benefit of the diet, and then you also are getting the benefit of replenishing the players that can make maximal use of that dietary fiber to replenish the processes that we've been talking about so far.
Okay. So then in getting the full benefit and helping to restore the integrity of the gut's lining, the mucin production, getting better balance and sensitivity responses, if you will, to the production of GLP-1 peptides in the body, and having them do that goodness that gives people that peace with food, reducing cravings, along with benefiting their blood sugar, the direct thing that we're after. There's all these other amazing benefits. Are there other things that you'd like to share that have to do with the science and evidence for the use of a symbiotic formulation to improve gut health and assist with glycemic management, blood sugar control in people with type 2 diabetes?
So the term symbiotic means that it's a combination of a probiotic along with a prebiotic, or in this case, a fiber source that the bacteria live off of or use as an energy source. So Pendulum glucose control, for example, contains inulin, which is a fiber that bacteria, these bacteria love to chew on and get their energy from. Inulin comes from Jerusalem artichokes, and also if you live in the South and are familiar with having chicory, and added to the coffee, chicory root is another good source of inulin.
That's good to know. I was recently traveling in New Orleans in Louisiana, and I was enjoying having chicory. It was available in a lot of beverages. So I've always enjoyed that particular herb, and you just give me one more reason. All right, great. So as we look towards wrapping up our interview, I wonder what your thoughts might be about future trends that might be coming and things people should be looking for. I know that Pendulum as a company is a leader and is looking to grow the audience and is also looking to grow the impact. We're all linked together. My own personal goal is to help 3 million or more people reverse type 2 diabetes, because I know the trickle-down effects will be amazing if we're able to accomplish that. So as a working team, we're all going towards the same goal, which is helping people to be healthier and to have their health span equal their lifespan. Because a lot of people, they're living longer, but they're not living better. And so I really feel like we got to close some gaps here around metabolic health, and type 2 diabetes would be right in the bullseye of that whole thing. What are your thoughts about things that you're either working on as a company or coming trends that you see, since you have such a long background in this work?
Well, so type 2 diabetes, is a very significant issue. But, the precursors of type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, of which there are millions of Americans that are, afflicted with the disorder, many not aware that they, have the issue. But I think being able to spread these approaches that we've been talking about out into that population as a preventative measure as opposed to being, reacting to a disease state once it's established, it is going to be proved to be very important, particularly amongst our young people. Many in the audience will be aware that there's an epidemic of type 2 diabetes in adolescents, these days. And, we've been seeing that now for about a decade, and that's been long enough that the data is emerging to show that type 2 diabetes emerging at that young age is particularly devastating, in terms of, if anything, those young individuals seem to be more susceptible to the chronic, complications, particularly the cardiovascular disease. So if we don't do something about that, we're going to see people with having significant heart attacks before the age of 30, which is just, frightening. So, and then, as you've said, Dr. Yates, multiple times, that this is all, connected together. I think, we're going to see that, particularly as it relates to neurodegenerative diseases, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, that multiple sclerosis, that these things that we've been talking about are going to be shown, or are being shown, to have a major impact, upon, neural health, and, mitigating some of those neurodegenerative, complications.
Yeah, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you, Dr. Kolterman. I see it coming right down the pike because, again, these things are related. The same way you can help to heal something and make it better, you can also exacerbate it and make it worse. It's the seesaw thing, this relationship. And I think the more we can talk with people and get the word out and educate them via summits, things that we do on LinkedIn or other places, social media, YouTube, however we're reaching folks, we have got to get the word out, because otherwise our young people are going to suffer, and they're going to suffer seriously, and they're going to have really crummy adult lives if they even live that long. I mean, it doesn't make sense for our health progress to go backwards so sharply, but that's exactly what we're seeing in real time. So we need to have effective answers in real time to meet the moment and make this better.
Well, really appreciate what you're doing to help get the word out. That's very, very, very important.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your kind words and being a sponsor and being with us here on this journey very much. All right, friends. So please share this episode, share other episodes that you watch with people that you know, that you care about. We really are trying to impact people's lives and make a positive difference in a chronic disease that is so very sensitive to lifestyle. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. Talks. We hope today's episode has enlightened and inspired you on your path to optimal health. Each day is a new opportunity to make choices that empower your well-being. For more insights and strategies, subscribe to our podcast and visit our website, www.drtalks.com. Stay connected, stay healthy, and join us next time on Dr. Talks, real talks from real doctors on the issues that matter to you most.